The Golden Age of Jewish culture in Spain coincided with the Middle Ages in Europe, a period of Muslim rule throughout much of the Iberian Peninsula. During intermittent periods of time, Jews were generally accepted in society and Jewish religious, cultural, and economic life blossomed. The nature and length of this Golden Age has been a subject of much debate. There were at least 3 Golden Ages interrupted by periods of oppression of Jews and non-Jews. A few scholars give the start of the Golden Age as 711 to 718, the Muslim conquest of Iberia. Others date it from 912, under the rule of Abd ar-Rahman III. The end of the age is variously given as 1031, when the Caliphate of Córdoba ended, 1066, the date of the Granada massacre, 1090, when the Almoravides invaded, or the mid-12th century, when the Almohads invaded. The nature of the Golden Age, having invaded the areas throughout southern Spain, and coming to rule in a matter of 7 years, Islamic rulers were confronted with many questions relating to the implementation of Islamic rule on a non-Islamic society. The coexistence of Muslims, Jews, and Christians during this time is revered by many writers. Al-Andalus was a key center of Jewish life during the early Middle Ages, producing important scholars and one of the most stable and wealthy Jewish communities and a relatively educated society for the Muslim occupiers and the Jewish collaborators, as well as some Christians who openly collaborated with the Muslims and Jews. Maria Rosa Menacle, a specialist in Iberian literature at Yale University, claims that tolerance was an inherent aspect of Andalusian society. Menacle's 2003 book, The Ornament of the World, argues that the Jewish demis living under the Caliphate, while allowed fewer rights than Muslims, were still better off than in the Christian parts of Europe. Jews from other parts of Europe made the way to Al-Andalus, where in parallel to Christian sects regarded as heretical by Catholic Europe, they were not just tolerated, but where opportunities to practice faith and trade were open without restriction save for the prohibitions on proselytization. Bernard Lewis takes issue with this view, calling it ahistorical and exaggerated. He argues that Islam traditionally did not offer equality nor even pretend that it did, arguing that it would have been both a theological as well as illogical absurdity. Quote, however, also Lewis states, generally, the Jewish people were allowed to practice the religion and live according to the laws and scriptures of the community. Furthermore, the restrictions to which they were subject were social and symbolic rather than tangible and practical in character. That is to say, these regulations served to define the relationship between the two communities, and not to oppress the Jewish population. Jews were allowed certain freedoms but, like their Christian counterparts, were prohibited from having administrative authority over Muslims except in a few cases. Mark Cohen, professor of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton University, in his On Crescent and Cross, calls the idealized interfaith utopia a myth that was first promulgated by Jewish historians such as Heinrich Gratz in the 19th century as a rebuke to Christian countries for the treatment of Jews. This myth was met with the counter-myth of the neo-lachrymose conception of Jewish Arab history by Bat Yaor and others, which also cannot be maintained in the light of historical reality. Birth of the Golden Age. Prior to 581, the Jews experienced a Golden Age under the Arian Visigoth occupiers of Spain. The Visigoths were mainly indifferent towards Jews and allowed them to grow and prosper. After the Visigoths joined the Catholic Church, they placed ever greater economic burdens on the Jewish population, and later persecuted them severely. It is possible that Jews welcomed the Muslim Arab and mainly Berber conquerors in the 8th century. A period of tolerance dawned for the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, whose number was considerably augmented by immigration from North Africa in the wake of the Muslim conquest. North African Jewish immigrants and immigrants from the Middle East bolstered the Jewish population, and made Muslim Spain probably the biggest center of contemporary Jews, especially after 912, during the reign of Abd ar-Rahman III and his son, al-Hakam II. The Jews prospered culturally, and some notable figures held high posts in the Caliphate of Córdoba. Jewish philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, poets, and rabbinical scholars composed highly rich cultural and scientific work. Many devoted themselves to the study of the sciences and philosophy, composing many of the most valuable texts of Jewish philosophy. Jews took part in the overall prosperity of Muslim Al-Andalus. Jewish economic expansion was unparalleled. In Toledo after the Christian reconquest in 1085, Jews were involved in translating Arabic texts to the Romance languages in the so-called Toledo School of Translators, as they had been previously in translating Greek and Hebrew texts into Arabic. Jews also contributed to botany, geography, medicine, mathematics, poetry and philosophy. Abd al-Rahman's court physician and minister was Hazda ibn Shaprat, the patron of Menahem ben Saruk, Danash ben Labrit, and other Jewish scholars and poets. In following centuries, Jewish thought flourished under famous figures such as Samuel ha-Najjad, Moses ibn Ezra, Solomon ibn Gabirol, Judah Halevi and Moses Maimonides. During Abd al-Rahman's term of power, the scholar Moses ben Enoch was appointed rabbi of Córdoba, and as a consequence Al-Andalus became the center of Talmudic study, and Córdoba the meeting place of Jewish savants. This was a time of partial Jewish autonomy, as demis or protected non-Muslims, Jews in the Islamic world paid the jizya, which was administered separately from the zakat paid by Muslims. The jizya has been viewed variously as a head tax, as payment for non-conscription in the military, or as a tribute. Jews had their own legal system and social services. Monotheist religions of the people of the book were tolerated, but conspicuous displays of faith, such as bells and processions, were discouraged. Comparing the treatment of Jews in the medieval Islamic world and medieval Christian Europe, the Jews were far more integrated in the political and economic life of Islamic society, and usually faced far less violence from Muslims, though there were some instances of persecution in the Islamic world as well from the 11th century. The Islamic world classified Jews as dhimmi and allowed them to practice the religion more freely than they could do in Christian Europe. Other authors criticize the modern notion of Al-Andalus being a tolerant society of equal opportunities for all religious groups as a myth. Jews were living in an uneasy coexistence with Muslims and Catholics, and the relationship between these groups was more often than not marked by segregation and mutual hostility. In the 1066 Granada massacre of the entire Jewish population of the city, the Jewish death toll was higher than in the much publicized Christian pogroms in the Rhine, and slightly later, the notable Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides was forced to flee from Al-Andalus to avoid conversion by the Almohads. In Letter to Yemen, Maimonides wrote, "Dear brothers, because of our many sins Hashem has cast us among this nation, the Arabs, who are treating us badly. They pass laws designed to cause us distress and make us despise. Never has there been a nation that hated, humiliated and loathed us as much as this one." End of the Golden Age. With the death of al-Hakam II ibn Abd ar-Rahman in 976, the Caliphate began to dissolve. and the position of the Jews became more precarious under the various smaller kingdoms. The first major persecution was the 1066 Granada massacre, which occurred on the 30th of December, when a Muslim mob stormed the royal palace in Granada, crucified Jewish vizier Joseph ibn Nagrela and massacred most of the Jewish population of the city. More than 1,500 Jewish families, numbering 4,000 persons, fell in one day. Quote, "This was the first persecution of Jews on the peninsula under Islamic rule. Beginning in 1090, the situation deteriorated further with the invasion of the Almoravids, a Puritan Muslim sect from Morocco. Even under the Almoravids, some Jews prospered. Among those who held the title of vizier or nasi in Almoravid times were the poet and physician Abu Ayyub Solomon ibn al-Mu'allim, Abraham ibn Mir ibn Kamil, Abu Isaac ibn Mahaja, and Solomon ibn Farazul. The Almoravids were ousted from the peninsula in 1148. However, the peninsula was again invaded by the even more puritanical Almohads. During the reign of these Berber dynasties, many Jewish and even Muslim scholars left the Muslim-controlled portion of Iberia for the city of Toledo, which had been reconquered in 1085 by Christian forces. The major Jewish presence in Iberia continued until the Jews were forcibly expelled en masse due to the Edict of Expulsion by Christian Spain in 1492 and a similar decree by Christian Portugal in 1496. Notable figures: Abu al-Fadl ibn Hazda, philosopher, vizier at Zaragoza. Abu Ruiz ibn Dari fought in the war against the Almohads. Amram ben Isaac ibn Shalbib, scholar and diplomat in the service of Alfonso VI of Castile. Bafia ibn Pakuda, philosopher and author of Chovihar Levevit. Bishop Bodo Eleazar, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, a convert to Judaism, went to Córdoba, where he is said to have endeavored to win proselytes for Judaism from among the Spanish Christians. Danash ben Labrit, poet. Isaac ibn al-Balia, astronomer and rabbi at Granada. Jekadhiel ibn Hassan, king's minister at Zaragoza, fell from favor, executed. Joseph ibn Hazda'i, poet, father of Abu al-Fadl ibn Hazda'i. Joseph ibn Migash, diplomat for Granada. Maimonides, rabbi, physician, and philosopher. Menahem ben Saruk, Nachmanides. Solomon ibn Gabirol, poet and philosopher. Moses ben Enoch. Yehuda Halevi, poet and philosopher. Abraham ibn Ezra, rabbi and poet. Moses ibn Ezra, philosopher and poet. Benjamin of Tudela, traveler and explorer. Samuel ha-Najid ibn Nagrela, king's minister and poet. Hazda ibn Shaprat, royal physician and statesman. Judah ben Saul ibn Tibban,